I could be over prepared or super prepared in advance, but it was never sort of my way for these things anyway. Like even when I used to speak a lot, I would prepare, but I would never have a prepared text in front of me. It was always at best an outline, mostly just, thoughts in my head organized. And then it was sort of like, go. I learned that there was years ago, I taught a class many years ago in high schools on the Middle East conflict. And the first time I prepared for the class, I went to a program, like a curriculum with a master teacher, this guy by the name of Tal Ben Shachar. I don't know if you know him. He is world famous for the subject, teaching on positive psychology and mostly happiness. Anyway, so for some reason at this point in his life, this is whatever many years ago, he had taught this course on the Middle East conflict, how to talk about the Middle East conflict, how to talk about Israel, how to talk about Palestinians. It was fascinating. And then there were like practicals where you had to get up and present. I'm like, I don't know how to do this. Like, he said, do this. He goes, prepare, and then just go. I was like, he goes, when you stand up and do the presentation, you should be prepared enough to just do the presentation. You don't need the notes. You're not going to look at your notebook, your curriculum, your whatever. So prepare and then go. I was like, fine. He goes, the first time you was going to be terrible. And it was terrible, but it was in front of this room of colleagues. So it was like totally fine. But it was such a good insight into how to do this, is to prepare. And then you prepared enough, and now you can actually have the conversation and you can do what you need, or, present the material. But if you have to look down at your notes and your thing, you're done at that point. Anyway, so I am prepared for today, but I didn't prepare in Word, everything that's gone out there. But let us start from our new usual place, which is our good of the week or our win of the week. I think your turn to go first.
All right. So my win of the week is from a woman named Julie Cooper. Julie Cooper is a fundraising writer. I'm on her email list. I've listened to her on a bunch of different podcasts, seen her on some webinars, really, really enjoy her writing and her teaching. And in her latest newsletter, she made a prediction. In 2025, we're going to see the use of nostalgia more in fundraising, and people playing up on just that sense of nostalgia, of history, of childhood, of youth. And she went into a couple of different reasons why she makes the prediction. One is generally the writing that she's doing for a lot of her clients, and in general, the writing that the messaging that we all should be thinking about is largely geared toward older donors. Older donors, statistically, from a data perspective, tend to give more than younger donors. So that tends to be where people focus their messaging. And as people get older, that sense of nostalgia kicks in more. But the relevance to 2025, why this would be the year of nostalgia, as she calls it, would be because it is a way to sort of fight against the AI-ification of messaging. And how people are using ChatGPT, people are using AI, which I know is a subject that you love talking about. And she wasn't saying that as a detriment, right? We should be using these tools. We're silly if we're ignoring these tools. But one of the things that it does is it's going to sort of force people to elevate their games, because we all now have this resource available to us. So how am I going to infuse that humanness, that personal touch, that this is, even if I use ChatGPT, this is still a message that was written by me, Raimy, and is being sent to you, Bini, even if it's being written or edited through ChatGPT or through another AI bot. And the use of nostalgia, that sense of emotion, that sense of identity, that really humans are still at this point, as of this recording of this podcast, we're still better at this than the bots out there of infusing that sense of identity and emotion into a message. And Julie, was seeing this really through the lens of nostalgia, which is, I don't know necessarily that I agree with the point specifically about nostalgia, that is the way that this is going to manifest itself. Yeah. We'll see, maybe yes, maybe no. But I thought that whole idea of us having to step up our games and sort of, now what are we going to do that we have all of this technology available to us? How are we going to make our fundraising better? Not our writing better, but are fundraising better, I think is a really interesting topic, and it just got me thinking a whole lot.
Yeah, no, on both of those pieces of it, just on the point itself of nostalgia, it's such an interesting insight, meaning like she's clearly like thinking about this at a very deep level and appreciating the heft that the tech is bringing to the game right now, and really how easy it is on some level to just use all the tech tools and forget about the rest of it. And nostalgia and history are almost like revolutionary, right? It's the rebellion against on some level. So I appreciate that point very much, especially as a guy who really advocates for people to use the AI tools that are available to them. And on the second part of that, which is your questioning whether or not that's the right point. So I would push, and maybe we should do an episode on trends for 2025. I think the push for in-person is going to be dramatically high in 2025, 2026. Events, one-on-one conversations with donors, real physical human experience in a way that was lost during the COVID thing. And now, because of all the tools and the lack of clarity about whether the things you're looking at are real or not real, I mean, it's still close, but are going to push people to want the in-person experience again. That might be highlighted and amplified and leveled up the experience with, the tech experience around it. But the physical experience, I'm not saying going back to gala dinners, but like in-person events, getting together, laughing with people, going to a show. So that's how I see that rebellion taking place in the space. And then people just having to figure out how to do it better than they did it in the past. But I love that comment from her. And I also am on her newsletter and I read it. And so great, good one.
It's interesting that you bring up that point about in-person events, because I hadn't thought of that as a trend for 2025 and beyond. But this is that you are the second person in, I don't know, 3 days to bring up that point to me, that that prediction. It was actually in response, I got into conversation with a colleague about our last episode and about what to do if you fell short of your fundraising goals for 2024. And one of the suggestions that he is making to his clients is to not just gather people, but gather people in your space, in the organization space, which obviously isn't relevant for every single organization, but to the extent that you can, get people in your building, which I just thought was a really, really phenomenal way to look at it, and something that we've overlooked over the last 5 years since COVID, and we're done with in-person events. We've sort of ignored our physical spaces as resources. But once you get people literally walking through the doors of your building, then they're starting to be able to see the impact in a real way.
See it on them when they come into the space. And the same way that during COVID, when you had the opportunity to get together, you cherished that opportunity during COVID. Leaving the virus aside for a second, just because you weren't allowed to, when you were able to, it was such a crush to be able to do it. And now I think, as much as I think it's a trend over the next couple of years, it's a fight also, because it's too easy not to do it. And it's too easy to rely on the tools and you get lazy. But I think the organizations that win ultimately will be the ones that somehow figure out how to get you out to their space, to an event, to a program, or they're coming into you and they're coming to where you are in a way that is needed in this. And I'm speaking from as a person who really doesn't like to go to events, who really just would rather not be invited, right? Let alone not go. And but I can appreciate the value of it. So it's a really good. I'm going to go a different direction. I'm going to go organization this time, and I'm going to pick an organization you and I both know that's here called United Hatzalah. And I just love IsraelRescue.org is their website. I obviously love the work that they do. Just to give it context for people who are listening who don't know them, it's basically an emergency ambulatory volunteer group that's all over here in Israel. There are 8,000 they're volunteers. There is a team and there's a staff, and their infrastructure is unbelievable. And if we ever get their CEO or somebody on their team on this to pepper them with questions, That would be awesome. Or to just get an on-site visit at their location, which would be also amazing. They just do incredible work as an organization, obviously. Their volunteers are amazing because obviously they're all volunteers. We know one quite well who shares stories from the field regularly of just being somewhere and saving someone's life, just like as if it's totally normal. And it's not. But I remember one case in the old office, his walkie-talkie went off. There was something going on in the street outside, and he left the building, went outside one floor down, and got involved in something. He posted about one recently also, and I just love the work that they do. I love the passion that they have for the work that they do at the organization. Their fundraising is ridiculous, but not just the CEO and the founder in terms of how he does. And I've seen him in action, and I would love to ask him about some of that because I think he's incredible at it. Just some of the people who support them, who seem sort of outside the bounds of who they are as an organization, the way they go about it, their follow through. This is the one part I talk about with other organizations. Their follow through and donor stewardship is on another level. To give you an example, a couple of years ago, my wife's law firm sponsored an event. They do an event every year, a basketball tournament, which is great. And we could talk to them about that event, which I think is great. And for the first 2 years of it, they donated an ambucycle, which is like the key item that United Hutzella is known for is the ambucycle. They donated one. And after the event was over, figure you're done. But she started to get emails from them, like on almost like a monthly basis, thanking her for the ambucycle, which she facilitated. Maybe we donated a little bit, but but the way they wrote the thank you was like you talked about before, which was basically telling her the impact it had and how many lives she had saved on that ambucycle over the course of whatever was a month, 2 months, 3 months. And it just felt like I just saved 100 lives, right? Whatever it is. And they do this great campaign. I actually have it here. We're gonna go real deep on the tech here for a second here inside Riverside. So this is their website. Let's see if I can pull it up here on the screen. Okay, you got it?
Yep.
Okay. So this campaign that they do, sponsor a day of life saving, a special way to honor and memorialize a loved one or a special milestone. Click on it. Their marketing is great. Everything they do really everything at the highest level. If it ever opens. So it's not a cheap thing to do. It's $18,000 to sponsor the day. But the concept is you're sponsoring a day of life saving. So they get 1,800 calls a day, whatever the number is, your money is sponsoring those volunteers for that day. That's your day. And you're sponsoring life saving for that day. It's like, if someone can do it, it's amazing. And it's almost, in my book, also something that you might even try to raise money for. I want to sponsor a day of life saving in honor of Raimy's upcoming birthday. What else can I get him? And like, you can raise 18 grand to the organization, and it's a power to, anyway, I just thought, I love the way they do their business. I love their work that they do, obviously. And I thought they're worth highlighting. And then this is my plug and my shout out to their team and their CEO and anybody else who wants to make an intro and get them. I've met him. I met them, like whatever, but super interesting organization.
Amazing. I love it. Great nomination.
Yeah. Okay, good. Oh, wait, let's dive into our topic of the day. Our topic of the day, by the way, the reason I want to point this out on the wall, I have now these two pictures. One's a picture from the old city of Jerusalem. The other one on top of it is my certificate of rabbinic ordination. And the reason that it's on there, and I'm also angling the camera in a different way because I rewatched the last episode, and there's an empty bookcase on the other wall here, which has a blanket still wrapped on it from when we moved the bookcase down to my office like 2 years ago. And it looks like I'm like in a shelter somewhere. I mean, I am, but like this is the safe room in our house, but it was embarrassing to show, like, put that on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Spotify. Everyone could see this, this thing. And also, like, behind all the pictures is like, it looks like bullet holes. It's not bullet holes. It's just, we pulled out some sort of a shelving system that was on the wall here, and it just looks horrible. So as we mentioned once before, you can angle the camera any way to tell the frame story that you want. And this is me doing that. So you can see the Western Wall in some old version, and then the proof that I have ordination I don't use it regularly, but I have it. And that, if anything else, as my teacher at the time said, all it proves is that you showed up and you took the test. It doesn't mean you know anything. It doesn't mean you're righteous or smart or anything else. It just means that on that day, you were there. So I just thought I would point that out. If you're not watching, you're just listening. So then check out the screenshot that I put up on LinkedIn from the little short that we did. So anyway, okay, our topic of the week is planning the calendar. This is probably, as much as we're recording this in January, this is probably something someone should have done already, when they're planning or however they're planning. But really, it's any time that their schedule warrants it, however they set up their calendar for the year, is when they're doing their annual planning. Most people are doing annual planning, in the calendar year. Some people are doing it on the scholastic calendar year from September to the summer. Some people might do a fiscal year, so they're starting in July, right? Any one of those is when a person is doing their planning scheduling. But because January is very often where that is, I thought this would be a good topic to dive into as people are looking at or laying out their year. And then the last thing just sort of spurred my thought was I saw an ad on, I want to say it was LinkedIn, but it might have been somewhere else, from, the guy Jesse Itzler. Do you know who that guy is?
No.
So Jesse Itzler, I think he owns the Atlanta Hawks, but he's like billionaire-ish type guy. His wife started Spanx, the company, also a billionaire-ish type of person now, highly successful guy. And he's super interesting. So he has something he calls the Big ASS calendar. I won't say that fully, but it's basically the full calendar for the year on paper that you can see every day of the calendar in front of you visually at the same time. And he likes to work on the calendar like that to set up and plan out his year. And so that popped up in my feed on some social media platform the last few weeks. It just sort of got me thinking about annual planning and just planning in general. So I thought this would be a good place to start this conversation.
My dad uses that same calendar, by the way, just the whole year at a glance. It's
For
remarkable.
what?
My dad is like 7 podcast episode in and of itself. Okay, I can't give you my dad in a bite-sized piece right now. I'm happy to deep
Maybe
dive.
that's
He's
a
my
different
favorite subject.
podcast. Like you just need to on the couch.
Yeah, annual planning. I don't even know that there is a good time, a bad time to do annual planning, because just as you and I were speaking about in the beginning of the show, there is, I think, a little bit of a harm or some sort of risk in over planning. I think there is something quite natural about, if you're having one of these big calendars, using a pencil. Let's use that either metaphor or something more literal than that. But to pencil it in, because you need to allow for flexibility. Things change all the time. So I think that even if you've already done this, even if you've already done some sort of planning, it's totally fine to look at it, see what you've done, and see what you're going to adjust as the year unfolds. I find this to be a really overwhelming task. I always find big annual planning to be really, really hard and overwhelming. And in thinking about this topic, I was recalling back to my days. My family and we used to be really big into puzzles. We would get these like giant, 1,000-piece puzzles, and we would do these puzzles. And like anything else, when you have this big puzzle, you have to start with the framework, right? That's how it gets easy. The puzzle, when you open up that puzzle and open up that box, and there's all these pieces, and none of them are put together right now, it really does feel in that moment like an impossible task. We are never going to get this done. But the strategy is to build literally the framework. You do the edge pieces first. And once you have those edge pieces, once you have that framework, then all of a sudden you can start to tackle other pieces of the puzzle bit by bit. And I thought that was a good analogy here as well, because there's certain things that are going to go. If you have your year calendar, if you have like the Atlantic Hawks owner or my dad, if you have that big calendar and you're getting ready to start penciling stuff in, there are things that you are going to you're going to revolve around that event, even if it's for a week, right? So, and we can take the biggest things on the calendar. We just spent a couple episodes talking about year-end giving. So let's start at the end of 2025. You know that December, there are going to be milestones in there around year of Endsgiving. If you are a school, you know that around graduation or the summertime, there's going to be a milestone there of some sort. And you can start to pencil those things in. If you have an annual dinner every year, which a lot of organizations do, it's generally in the same time, the same month, thereabouts every year. You can start to pencil those things in. And all of the sudden, just by putting those major milestones, you have that framework. You say, okay, anything else that we're going to do to fill this in, we know it's not going to happen, December 15th, because we already have a pretty major milestone. We already have some pretty major events going on, or, the weeks leading up to your annual dinner or whatever it may be. And all of a sudden you can start, once you have those key pieces in place, you can start to see the bigger picture. You can start to fill in the rest of the puzzle. So that's, for me personally, when I'm getting started with something large like this, that's where I like to start. And that really lessens that feeling of overwhelm that I feel at first.
Yeah, I call those things anchor events. And because they're rooted in they're in the ground. Like they're in there. They're not coming out. They're there. They're going to happen in some form or fashion. And as anchor events, the swirl that happens around them just picks up. So I'll give you take your example. Let's say you have a gala dinner every year. It's in May, right? So I'm going to drop anchor in May 15th. Around there is going to be our dinner. You don't have the exact date because you put it in pencil, but it's anchored. That's an event. So that for me informs all of my March and April and everything that's after that until the beginning of June in terms of activities, in terms of work that I'm going to be focused in on, in terms of goals that I'm going to be setting for the weeks, things that I'm going to be not doing, right? The things I'm avoiding during that period of time as well, because I've set those pillars, anchors in place. So that's one, is another form of anchor. In a second, I'm going to bring up, but I like to do that with one-on-one when I'm working with a leader, because I think that's really helpful for them to sort of visualize it. And I'll explain a little bit more in a second here. The other part of an anchor, the calendar itself has certain anchors in it as well. You talked about end of year. So the May dinner is it's arbitrary. We decided that's when it's going to be. But December 31st is December 31st every single year. And so that is an official formal anchor that you can't move. And so like we talked about, using it or not using it, but it's going to be there regardless. So I think that's an important other, and relatedly to that in the calendar, there are other anchors that you can move either. Holidays are when they are, regardless of your community, faith, wherever you live, those things exist. So July 4th is July 4th if you're in the US. If you're a person of faith, right? So Christmas is when Christmas is, Rosh Hashanah is when Rosh Hashanah is in that community. And that also helps you visualize, one, so you can see how things lay out on the calendar, and help you anchor or avoid putting down anchors around those kinds of things as well. The third part of this with anchors, which I really love, is I was working with a client maybe 2 years ago, my first coaching, like independent coaching client. It's a leader of a small organization who had too many things going on. She was just a jumble. Like there was just so many events. And I said to her, okay, let's organize these by priority of either audience or fundraising, however you want to do it. Okay. And put them in that order, the most to the least. So she ordered this like 15 things. It's like a ton of things. And I said, okay, which are the first two? She showed me the first two. I said, those are your anchors. Okay. They're the most important. They should take, because of your anchors, they should take the most of your time because they're going to yield the most results for you in the course of the year. By virtue of that, what helped was that she suddenly had a lot of clarity around some of these smaller things that she was spending too much time on that were not her burden, that got in the way of her ability to focus on what she really needed to focus in on, which would help the organization get to the next level phase, whatever. Before she even got to goals, it was, these are my pillars from my experience over the last 3 years. These are the things, 1, 2, 3. And I'm like, okay. I said, so that fourth or fifth or eighth thing that happens to take place in and around number one, either you discard it completely or you give it to somebody else to do. And so it's not on your plate at all. By zooming in on the smaller third tier item, when number one is staring you in the face, really can hurt you. And by setting up the calendar that way, you're able to see, anchor number one, pillar number two, whatever those things are, it really helps orient. It just helps, if nothing else, you've oriented your calendar and you have at least a picture of when things are and how close they are in proximity to each other. And I think that's a massive first step.
So there's something you said in there that's not obvious to me that I want to pick at for a second, and that is that this step comes before goals. And the reason why that doesn't sound intuitive to me is because let's take the gala dinner example again. That generally is going to be for major donors. Let's say you've been doing this every year, and let's say you haven't been putting your heart and soul into the dinner every year. It's sort of been running on routine, right? Yeah, you make it nice and it's good, but you haven't been doing something new each and every year. And every year it brings in the same amount of money because the same major donors are coming in to celebrate the organization's success. So you might decide at that point, yes, of course we're going to run our dinner. That's great. But our goal for this year is going to be on, I don't know, donor acquisition or donor retention for donors who are new to the organization or aren't major donors but are giving, a more nominal amount. And once you have the goal to say, yeah, we're obviously going to run our annual fundraiser that's brought in X number of dollars each and every year, but our organizational focus, our goal this year is going to be on bringing in new money on donor acquisition, then you might structure your calendar differently based on those sense of goals.
You might, and you're allowed to, pick up, anchor, and move, but you do need to start, I think, somewhere with it. And I think if you start with goals, sometimes it's too out there. And when it doesn't have any roots at all, then it becomes a problem. Yeah, if you're starting from scratch, you're a brand new organization, it's a different story altogether. You don't have a calendar. All you have are the holidays and the things that are built into the actual calendar. You don't have anything else. So then, yeah, everything is open. And what happens there a lot of the time is it's too hard to set anchors because you have too many things that you're trying to prioritize and you can't figure out what it's going to be. And so you live and learn. Most organizations that I'm coming into and working with exist already. And they've done what they've done, right? So I can look back at the last 3 years with them and say, okay, tell me which were your biggest two events. Let's look at your calendar from the last couple of years. What happened? What got in the way? No judgment, just what got in the way of what you were doing that made that dinner better or worse last year versus the year before, whatever that is. And then ask yourself the question, is that the right time for that event, right? It could be that it's not. Organizations that I worked with a long time ago, I'm not connected to at all. I know they moved their dinner from May to December. They skipped a year, I think it was, and then the year after they came back in December. They decided that for their donor base, that was better. And for their team, it was better. I don't know if it worked or didn't work, but it was noticeable that they had moved it. So great, you can pick up anchor and move it. And there's always a good reason. But I think that I would start with a visual, the same way that in parallel, when we were coaching clients for campaigns and you were providing the copywriting, your first conversation with them came with a text attached to it and wasn't something that was just in the ether. Because it was just out there in the ether, it's an impossible conversation to have because there's just too many things that are floating out there. And so I want to start with a root and anchor, a visual. I want them to interact with it. I want them to struggle with it. I want them to look at it and say, X, we're moving the dinner. We're moving our annual peer-to-peer campaign. We're going to do the race in December because we decided to make it a winter race because we wanted just the toughest, the toughest people to run and not have 5,000 people running, whatever. So, but I want to start from a real place with them and not some, just dream idea, even though I do that with people. I do dream sequences and dream conversations and thinking about the big and all that other stuff as well. It was a much longer answer than the question, but yeah.
No, I think that makes sense. I wonder if you have to balance it, right? Because by anchoring yourself with the dinner, again, to keep using that example, you're then sort of leading yourself to create a goal around that dinner, right? Therefore, once our dinner is in May, therefore a goal for the organization has to be that we're going to bring in this number of dollars through the dinner.
Yeah, I'm interrupting you, but I think that absolutely you could go the other route and say, okay, when I'm coming in, what are your goals for the year? and then how do you expect to, meet your goals? And you can do it the other way around for sure. When I'm starting with somebody, let's say, and they already exist, I want to sort of see, I want to see that calendar, and that as well. And, you probably could do both exercises at the same time.
I get that. I get that. It's definitely filling in that calendar, even if you know you're going to erase some things and move them. It's certainly easier than starting with a blank calendar.
Yeah,
So
that's why
I
you
appreciate it.
That's why you go in pencil, right? You're going to go
Yeah.
pen or marker on the holidays in the calendar because those don't move, right? But the things that can move, as I said, the anchor, it's an anchor. But as I said, like on boats, anchors do move. You're just deciding where you're going to put the anchor down for the coming year. And I think that's, to me, like, I like that first. Like, I like the visual. I like to give them something back on it when they're thinking about it. I do then like to do the goals conversation. I can do those two things related. And I think if you're doing the goals, you can do them separate from each other. Like, leave the dinner out for a second. Now let's step back. You've anchored your calendar a little bit. You can see what you're talking about in terms of where things are going to be. Maybe now let's take a step back and talk to me about, the goals for the year, and let's do a goals conversation. And then after that conversation is, well, how do those two things jive at all? Maybe they do, and maybe they don't.
Right. Which of your anchor points are going to contribute to the goals, and what are you going to do if they don't, or what are you going to do if you have goals that you don't know what activities we're going to do to move the needle there? I totally get that framework.
Yeah, and I'm going to look back, because if you're going to talk about, annual goals going forward, you do have to look at what you did the last year, the last 2 years, and, express some judgment and evaluation and review and analysis of what was good and what wasn't good. And that's where some of this uprooting the anchors comes up, which is, that someone on the team says, yeah, we've done the dinner 7 years in a row in May, and it's been like, it's not great. We're competing with Memorial Day weekend, or, the summer is kicking in, and like, we can't compete with weddings and other events and summer weekends away and vacations. And like, maybe we should move it up a month or two. And then that's the great conversation that the team has, because now they're between the conversation around the goals and the execution of it. When we used to do annual planning at the company, right? So I used to run those for the company with the CEO. And part of it was, what are we trying to accomplish here? But then after the first round of it, we realized that not just what are we trying to accomplish, was how are we going to accomplish this? And how are we going to measure whether or not we're actually accomplishing? So like, once you get, past, let's say, the pillar piece, and you get to the goals piece, and now you're getting into the execution piece, those are always sort of how I would break it down. But I'd go back to you, like, if you're going to plan the year and you're looking at goals first, how are you doing the goals conversation?
Well, I'm breaking it down by audience. To me, there's three categories by default. I'm sure every organization could do this a little bit differently, but they're in my head. I've sort of organized it in my head with three different categories, and that is donor acquisition, donor retention, and major donors. Depending on your organization, you can do grants, corporate gifts. Like, I think there's more audiences that you can break it down by. But again, breaking it down helps me feel less overwhelmed. So down now I can sort of have that conversation about the activities we're going to do based on the goals that we hit, and based on the goals that we set. And I would say that it is totally acceptable. And in many cases, it's a smart thing to do, to not pick a goal, right? To say, like, we're not really going to focus. We're not going to put donor acquisition, let's just say, as a major goal for the organization. We're not going to have so many activities to get new donors into the organization, because we really want to focus on donor retention this year. And we want to make sure that everyone who gave last year, especially if they were new on the books last year, gives again this year. And say, we're not going to have so many activities over the course of the year that are going to push us forward on donor acquisition. I think that's totally, totally fair. And again, in many ways, it's smart. So once you have your goals and you're going to say, we want to improve donor retention, or we had X number of donors last year, we want to make sure that it's Y number this year. Then you can start to work backwards and say, okay, what are the activities that we need to do to get there? And start to plan that year. And it comes back to me, a lot of that, especially if we're talking about more mass communication to a large group of donors and not necessarily the major donors, a lot of it comes back to that ask, thank, report cycle, which also helps provide a framework for a communications calendar or for an activities calendar on the calendar, where you can say, okay, all of our donors who gave last year, especially if they were new donors last year, we can send them a special newsletter that's just for people who are new to the organization over the last year. It's going to have this information, and we want to send that once a month or once every other month or once a quarter. But then you can start to pencil that piece of communication into the calendar as well for that specific audience. And you can do that for all of these different audiences.
That's super interesting. I'm going to give you a different perspective on this totally, which is the following. You talked in space of donor acquisition, donor retention, that kind of thing. I'm going to look at it from the standpoint of the executive in the organization who has to keep those things in mind. But look at it from a goal standpoint, not just on the fundraising side, on the impact side, right? So the programmatic side of what we do, how many beneficiaries of our services are there, stuff like that. Because what you're talking about fuels that. And the executive has to think about all those pieces, about the donor retention, the donor acquisition, the dollars for sure, but not buying for themselves, right? So they are in the service of something, the big why of our organization, the what and the how and the why of what we do, our mission, our vision, our passion, whatever we're trying to accomplish, whether that's the local fire department to the school, to the rescue organization we mentioned before. All that work is not in service of itself for those donors. Those donors are in service of everything that goes around it. And so I think it's important to appreciate that those are related, and they have to be connected and tied to each other, because you could say, you know what, we want to help 1 million people this year, but if last year you only helped 10,000, how are you going to scale from 10,000 to 1 million, right? And it might not be possible. It might be possible. Then you're looking at donor retention, donor acquisition. It might change the metric also in those two, because it's like, well, if we want to, scale 10x as an organization over the course of 1 year, I don't necessarily recommend it, but we need to then hold on to many more donors than we did. So then maybe it informs the goals on some of those pieces as well. Because if you go from 45% to 75% on retention, let's say, you're going to hold on to a lot more money while you're bringing in new donors, right? To me, that's a super important aspect of what's going on over there on the Ruben side of this podcast. You're getting attacked. Sounds like you're getting attacked on your computer. So to me, that's an important aspect of the work when I'm talking to a leader, because I'll go in, there'll be the conversation with the fundraiser, right? It could be the same person. They're going to talk about dollars and cents. And I'll say, okay, you want to raise 10% more money. That's a great goal. What? What are you trying to do year over year? And not just to boost your numbers. What are you trying to accomplish year over year from an impact standpoint that that warrants that effort, or is looking for that effort to need to accomplish that to get to the next thing? And it could be anything from what we talked about before last time, or whenever that was, the why is because otherwise the board's going to let me go. Or the why is because I really see that there are hundreds and hundreds of children who really need our services that we cannot service because we don't have the funding to do that. Right. And then you ask the question, okay, so how do we do that? And one of the ways that we do that is by donor acquisition, donor retention, all those other things. And then the pillar comes into play, which is now, let's say, okay, so the gala dinner does this. We need to move our gala dinner either physically on the calendar, or we need to elevate that experience so that it raises more. We need to spend more on it to get to. So then what you've done is you've linked your pillar events on your calendar to your goals for the year, for your financial goals for the year, to your impact goals, writ large for the organization. You're here to actually show that you've actually accomplished something, right? And so to me, that's how I would work it up and I work it down. So, so the work it down is starting with the pillars and the goals, like we talked before, into the how. And then now I'm looking at the how, making sure that every one of those things actually connects and lines up. How does what I'm doing inform or act upon the what of what I want to do and the why of why I want to do it, and see that progression, which makes life easier for a leader because there are less gaps in what you're trying to do.
How often do all those things line up so cleanly that you would say, we want 1,000 more beneficiaries, therefore we need 10,000 more dollars, and therefore we know we have these activities that are going to bring in 10,000 more
They
dollars?
usually don't, but it's more of progress and improvement and more impact. And so what I've worked on over the last year for myself and also people that I'm working with is high, medium, and low goals. So I'll do different goal sets because I want to move them into a space of thinking about where they want to be, but I also want to be honest and appreciate the things that come up that are either unintended or unexpected, and that affect the work that we're doing. And the other part of it is I sometimes goals are the impediment to bigger goals. And what I mean by that is sometimes you set a goal and that's a comfortable goal. And so you shoot for it and you hit it and congratulations. When you could have set a goal that was, 5 times larger and hit that goal too, you just would have had to work harder and made more effort and it would have been more complicated to get there. But you don't set that goal because it's too hard or it's too big. And so by setting high, medium, and low, the high is like, that's the high. Everything went crystal clear, right? Better than expected this year. And we hit, so much higher than we thought. But because it's on the paper and you see it, it can become more of a reality than if you don't ever write it down. And because, you could have a situation where you set the low goal and the low goal, even the low goal was a lot. Let's say that was a 10% increase year over year. And then you got it there in a month. You're like, okay, we're done. Right. So then you realize, oh, that wasn't such a goal because we got there so quickly. There's someone I know, a fundraiser who has an amount they have to raise every year. It's a set amount. He hits that goal pretty quickly in the year. And then he doesn't do anything. And I look at it and I'm like, well, that's the greatest gift in the world. Like, like you need to hit, let's say it's $1 million and you get there with X number of donors that you deal with on a regular basis. And they're consistently good donors every year. And you do the stewardship, you have these relationships with them. That's amazing. That should not remain the ceiling for you. That should now become the basement, the foundation that you're now building on top of, right? It's a terrible business model, I think, that you sort of like, you hit your low goal and you're done. Like, congratulations. When that was the high, that was hard and you hit it and like, congratulations, you broke through. Don't just stay there, like go for Everest on these kinds of things and try to find 5 more. And my sense from this person is that, they're not interested.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. So, like, let's say the organization hired you to coach this person, and let's keep it focused on our topic at hand. He busts out his calendar and he said, "All right, let's do annual planning." And he's like, by, I don't know what month it is, by July, I've normally hit my annual goal. So I now have August through December to kick my feet up. What are you doing with him in those months to help? Let's not focus right now on helping him stay motivated, right? Because I think that is a topic for a different conversation. But in terms of like the planning of that calendar, how do you push him forward?
Yeah, it's super hard. When a person isn't motivated, it's super hard to get them there's no reason for him to stretch the calendar into 12 months when he's doing it in 6 months. There's no reason for that. The only thing that you can do is try to work with them to find a bigger goal that's worthwhile for them to try to hit, in many cases without risk, right? There's no risk at that point because the person, let's say, has hit their goal. There is a high reward in being twice as effective and the opportunities that potentially come. So one of the things that I would do that I do with people is I'll do a business case analysis, pro con for that next goal number, right? And so as an exercise, meaning it's not it's not a requirement, but I'll say, okay, look, you got your $1 million by July 1. Congratulations, you're finished. But talk to me. What would $2 million, an additional? Let's say you double. what would $2 million do for your organization, right? Take the person out of it for a minute, because sometimes they're not motivated themselves for themselves, whatever reason. And sometimes they are. If they're self-motivated, the best. But if they're not, like, tell me what another $1 million would do for this organization. If you could replicate what you just did and you could raise another $1 million, how would that benefit X or Y or Z organization? And then make the case for doing that effort and against making that effort. And then have them, most of the time, it's not me judging them, it's have them judge
themselves.
Yes. And work through what they're doing and why they're doing like that. That whole exercise is sometimes can be brutal for somebody to look at it and say, I'm only half as effective as I can be. And the reason why I flipped, first, in the coaching course that I studied with, that's the way they taught it. But I've also lived the experience where I've actually said that to somebody and that did not work. Where I said, you're only half as effective as you could be. And they were so offended. Just to give it the context, I was talking to, it was a rabbinic colleague of mine years ago who was a rabbi in a community somewhere. And he was talking about his growth numbers year over year, which was great. Like he's talking about the number of people, new people coming to the synagogue, to the classes, to the membership. And I asked him, I said, how many, here's the quote, how many Jews in this town, right? And he gave me a number and it was like 10 times higher than the amount of people that come to his place on a regular basis. And I'm like, I said, for every person that comes, there are 10 that don't, right? And he said, yeah. I said, how are you effective? Like how's that effective? And I felt like he wanted to punch me in the face across the table, but he's such a sweet, pleasant person. Like he was just offended by it. And I realized, okay, that's not the way to do this exercise. I learned. And in the coaching course that I did, it was more of, let's put all the pieces out there and let's have the person, figure out what that is and make a decision and say, you know what, I'm good. I don't, the business case is, I get it. I'm just not interested. And that probably not working with that person for very long, right? Because there's nothing there. At the same time, you get another person who is not on their own. They're working for somebody else and they get to their goal pretty quickly also annually, right? So there's a metric that actually works because it's incentivized potentially by either more money, by more opportunity, all kinds of other things that could, or a loss of employment that could inspire someone, quote unquote, to go do double the work to have double the impact. But like, it doesn't just happen like that.
Yeah.
I'm saying you had this also, right? I'm sure many people that they'll come to you with a campaign or something and you're writing it and they're writing it for, a fraction of what they could be raising. You don't say anything?
No, of course you do. Of course you try and push them to do the best they can. In that case, I think people see a lot of obstacles that don't exist. I don't think it's a lack of motivation so much as it is there's just a fear. But
I want to dive in then on the obstacle part of this, because once you've done the main events for the year, plus or minus that you want to do them, once you've talked about goals, both the impact goals and the financial goals in terms of donor acquisition, donor retention, whatever that is, one of the other pieces that I think worth spending a few minutes here on is the pitfalls, the obstacles, all that other blocks that could come up during the year. So then what's that conversation?
Well, give me a for instance.
So, okay. The last couple of years, there has been some sort of local instability that has impacted your work. So let's assume for a moment that you are an organization that is like a local communal organization in a multiracial, multi-ethnic community in the United States. Okay. You do, I don't even know what you do exactly, but you feed the homeless. Let's say just feed, simple. You feed the homeless. Okay. And every year for the last 5 years, as much as you've done that work, there have been more people who need food for more reasons than you could have planned for. Because of a pandemic, because of an election, because of a police brutality killing, because of some other protest, because of some war that's taking place 9,000 miles away. There's always some sort of upheaval. And every year you're like, what the heck? Like, we had planned and we had this and we had everything right. And so obstacles. So I'm asking you now, leader Raimy of this organization, how are you planning for the obstacles? What are the things that get in your way in the course of an annual year? And then what are you doing to not run into them, but to mitigate what's going on?
I think that's hard. I think that's legitimate, and you can't avoid obstacles often. I mean, we see that. We see it with natural disasters happening right now. Like, there are things that you cannot plan for that are reality. Yes, and you have to adapt. I think there has to be some sort of flexibility. That's why writing all of this stuff in pencil is helpful, because there's curveballs. There's always a curveball. In my mind, what I always come back to is to, I want to say this in the most meaningful, delicate way as possible, but to turn those sorts of crises, to turn those sorts of obstacles into opportunities, right? And you can do that often by communicating to your constituencies and explaining what the problem is that's out there right now and how you're dealing with it, and how you weren't not you weren't prepared to deal with it, but we as a collective weren't expecting this. And once you lay that out there as a problem, I have seen that people respond. They want to be problem solvers. They want to be part of the solution for this problem. So if you are dealing with an obstacle, something that came up over the course of the year that you now have to deal with, finding a strategic way of communicating that problem to donors, to your constituency, sort of shifting that onus of responsibility or of opportunity to them to say, you can solve the problem by donating, by volunteering, whatever the ask is, but by sort of giving them a role in the story, then it becomes less about you as an individual, as a leader, less about you as an organization, and more about the audience that you're speaking to, and more about the community that's being formed around it.
That definitely, yeah. And you probably can plan for some of them, right? It's not like you're just putting in some sort of an emergency plan, but it's contingencies on some level. Like, in the event of X, what are we doing? In the event of Y, it's not to say you're going to get it right, because, as you said, sometimes it's reality, and sometimes it's like so out of nowhere that you can't plan for it. But you can be in sort of ready mode for some of these things, or you can have certain things in place to be able to, get a message out, get some work done, because the network already exists, let's say, that you have spent time on. And so it's not something you're always thinking about, but it is something you can spend a little bit of time on planning for, so that you can know how those things work. So let's take, it's a natural disaster. Let's say the fires that are going on right now in California. If you have an organization that has a really strong network, right? So they may be they may have been doing feeding the homeless, right? Before, and that was what they usually felt the homeless was, people who were out of work, people who had mental issues who were on the streets, people who, all kinds of reasons. And now it's not that. It's people who have been very successful in their lives, whose homes have burnt down, but they're also now homeless. And so your audience on some level of service shifts to some degree, but your network is still resilient enough in place, because you prepared, quote unquote, on some level for this, even though you didn't spend a lot of time on it while you're preparing for it. You could do that in those kinds of obstacle situations that come up. I remember when Hurricane Sandy hit in New York in 2012. So I was working at a synagogue organization. Synagogues, community religious centers, are incredibly resilient and strong. The networks are amazing. And the ability to see how they were able to adapt and just take care of all kinds of needs for natural disaster. You would have thought they were prepared for it. They weren't. But they seemed to just, I wouldn't say organically, naturally be able to manage it, but it felt like they organically, naturally were able to handle things that were so far outside the bounds of what they do by being a religious center, by becoming these incredibly strong community centers, because I wouldn't say they prepared for it, but a little bit they had prepared for some of it. I would add a different aspect to this too, is part of what I do with a leader one-on-one is their own obstacles. And what are the things that get in their way? And what are the things that they can do when they know that, something's coming? They get turned down by a donor, program goes south quickly, they have a disagreement with a leader, and that affects their ability to work. They get burnt out and they need to refresh. What are the things that they're doing to either preempt those things happening, creating a different habit set? And see, I've started to use some of those atomic habit terms from James Clear because people know them a little bit and they have enough gravitas in the world that people can use them and appreciate them, and then have a person prepared. There was a leader I worked with a couple of years ago who had a listening problem. It's not a nonprofit thing. It was a leader thing. And he was not good in meetings with his team. And after interviewing his team, which is what I did, what came out was that he was not good at listening during meetings. He just didn't hear them. And so we put a plan together for him to know when he wasn't paying attention, what he had to do to get back in the room physically and mentally. Physically, he was there, mentally back in the room. What could he not do at the same time, right? He was like a multitasker kind of guy. And to be able to refocus, right? And then we checked like 3 months later to see, whether that obstacle had been tackled, dealt with, not at all. Yeah. And so that was another thing that can be done if you're working with a leader one-on-one or with a team of people, as, okay, guys, you do an annual dinner every year in May, and by 2 weeks before the event, everyone wants to kill each other on the team. We know that's an obstacle. We know it's an obstacle going in. Is it something we can avoid? Is it something we can fix? Is it something that we can prepare for? Is it something about the timeline we need to get to the success that we want? And therefore we can avoid the problem from the beginning by being preemptive about it. Like, part of the reason to do the obstacles conversation is to be preemptive about it and not just prepare for it, because sometimes you can't prepare for every natural disaster. Like, you don't know that a hurricane's coming, there's going to be wildfires or whatever it is, but you can be sort of preemptive on some level and have plans in place for all these other things. I'll give you an example, and we're almost out of time here. But during Hurricane Sandy, I was working at this city organization. We were having board elections around that time, right? And so we had scheduled, and it was the first time in a long time that the organization was having board elections. It was a big deal. And we were going to turn over a large percentage of the board. The board election took place in the middle of Hurricane Sandy. There was no power, the wind, the rain, the water, all creeping up. And I had to find a phone from my kid's toy box that was a wired phone that I could plug back into. The only thing that worked was wired, because you could tap into a phone line. You couldn't use wireless. There were no cell towers. And the guy I was working with, my co-executive, was like, we should just cancel and do another. I'm like, there is no way we're canceling this meeting. Like, how would that look if we cancel this meeting? So in the dark on my bedroom floor with a rotary phone that was a toy that actually still worked, we held the election for this organization. And we turned over, I think, 70% of the board. You couldn't prepare for that. There was no way to prepare for that meeting, like in that format. And every reason was to not do it, except that, like, we needed to come out the next day and show we are tough as nails organization. We are going through this revamp and we're going to change this board, because it was only in New York where there was a hurricane. Most of the people who I was bringing on were from all over the country. And so they didn't have a hurricane. Yeah. They didn't care that I was in the middle of a hurricane. So you can't always prepare for the natural disasters. But I would say on the flip side of that is the organization and the communities afterward was so well prepared to help and support and be there for everyone else that it sort of showed both aspects of the disaster or the relief or the effort of being prepared on some level in advance.
Yeah, it's expect the unexpected sort of thing.
Yeah, I don't know that we covered all of the planning piece of it, because we didn't get into exactly how you might do the conversations for an organization. which would be super interesting. In how you plan that out, how you go through that exercise. What are you checking? What are you checking against? What are you, what are you rejecting? What are you including? All that other stuff, or even working all the way back. We'll have to come back to it at some point in the future. I'd be super interested in hearing from you. That once you built the pillar, or you know when it's going to be, or you know what the goal is, how you build back from, to step 1 from step 10 to be able to build that and make sure that it's successful. We'll have to save that for another time.
Sounds good.
Any closing words?
No, I think we're good on this.
Following, just saying, we froze there for a second. Sorry about that. I'll just end it. We should say this at the beginning, but we'll say it so far. We've only done a handful of episodes so far. Feedback's been great. Comments have been great. The audience so far, our friends, our network, our colleagues have been really positive and really just good, insightful ideas, names of people we should contact, organizations to talk to, topics and ideas. We appreciate every single one of them. And as always, I'll say it like that. Like, subscribe, and share the podcast with everybody you know in the field and beyond the field. This is about the world of good, and there are a lot of people who fit into the world of good, and we want to know all of them, and we're interested in talking to really all of them to really appreciate at its core what makes the world of good actually work. And just, keep it coming. There's going to be more episodes of this. So I think at the moment we're going weekly, but keep sharing, keep commenting, keep subscribing and liking, and keep being part of that community. All right. Leave it there.
Thanks, Benny.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye.